Welcome to everyone joining us. I think Zoom is letting folks in as we speak. So I hope you're all hearing me loud and clear. Welcome to everyone joining us today. It is my pleasure and privilege to welcome you here to our panel event, Rethinking Justice, the Rights of Nature Movement. My name's Georgina Gorman, and I'm the Executive Director of TreeSisters. If you haven't heard of us before, TreeSisters is a vibrant living movement where environmental action meets deep nature connection and gender equity. We support ethical, community-rooted planting projects that take bold climate action, uplift women, and honour the leadership of local and Indigenous communities in restoring their lands. Over the past over a decade, we've worked with partners in 19 countries and planted almost 30 million trees and restored almost 11,000 hectares of tropical forest. In doing this, we've supported thousands of women to care for their lands and to step into leadership and entrepreneurship, improving their own lives, whilst also challenging gender stereotypes and dynamics within their families and broader communities too. At TreeSisters, we also champion the rights of nature and are growing a global shift, restoring our bond with the earth and remembering what it means to live in a better relationship with the natural world. So if you're already part of our network and have supported our work, we express our deepest gratitude for your commitment to showing up for the earth and for being here today. And if you're just meeting us now, then welcome. Whether you know it or not, you are already a true sister. So thank you and welcome. In just a moment, I'll be handing over to my wonderful colleague, Ashley, who will be hosting the conversation today. And we can't wait to hear from our exceptional guests on the panel today. I, for one, am very excited for this conversation. We will hopefully have some time for Q&A at the end, so please feel free to add your questions in the Q&A box as we go. And you'll also notice we're recording today's conversation. You'll receive a follow-up email from us within the next few weeks with the recording and any other information from us. So it is my pleasure to once more welcome you to Rethinking Justice, the Rights of Nature Movement. Ashley, over to you.
Thank you, Georgina. We want to welcome everybody here today. This is the first big day of London Climate Action Week. I believe it is the biggest event so far, which is very exciting with over 700 events planned this week. We really want to thank you for choosing this as one of your events. That's really exciting for TreeSisters. I want to introduce Brontie, Rosa, and Mumta, who are all visiting us here today from, I think, two from the UK. Rosa, you have to tell us where you're dialing in from today. But just a brief introduction for all of them before we get started on the panel. But I want to thank each one of them again and tell everyone how absolutely impressive and amazing this team of women is. Brontie was named one of Vogue Business's 100 Innovators of 2024. She's a leading voice in the rights of nature movement and co-founder of Lawyers for Nature. In 2022, she helped design the legal framework that allowed Faith in Nature to appoint nature to its board of directors, a world first. Brontie then served as Nature's legal guardian on the board for 2 years, and TreeSisters is exceptionally honored that Brontie has just joined our board. So thank you, Brontie. Rosa is a chemical biologist hailing from Peru. She's a National Geographic explorer, UN Harmony with Nature scientist, founder of the Amazon Research International, and international ambassador for the Ashaninka people. She was the first to explore and document the Amazon's boiling river microbiology, led Peru's first chemical study of stingless bees and their medicinal honey, and contributed to scientific work supporting Peru's law, the first legal protection for stingless bees. Her honors include the Peru's Order of Merit, BBC 100 Women, the Explorers Club New Explorer Award, recognition as one of 50 people changing the world, and most recently, as of about 2 weeks ago, she was named to Forbes Peru's Most Powerful Women list. Mumta is a lawyer, in fact, named as a warrior lawyer, one of Europe's leading experts on the rights of nature, and founder and director of the organization Nature's Rights, She's the creator of the Integrated Rights Framework, which is endorsed by the European Economic and Social Committee, which embeds economic and human rights within the rights of nature and the SDGs within planetary boundaries. Her focus is on establishing the legal foundations of a regenerative society where all life thrives. So thank you, all of you. Whenever I'm on these events with women, I'm always going, I feel like I could achieve much more in life. So thank you all for doing all of this amazing work for us. To get us started today, I wanted to give each of you the opportunity to tell everyone attending today, what does the rights of nature mean to you, both in practical and ethical terms, and why is it important that we are discussing it? And also, what is your work within the rights of nature movement? So I'll give you a few minutes each. Brontie, if you'd like to kick us off.
Thanks, Ashley. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming and listening to us at the start of London Climate Week. So just in terms of answering those two questions, the way I want to approach this is to say to you a particular sentence that I heard Rebecca Solnit say about 2 weeks ago when I was listening to her in Brighton. And she said, any crisis is a crisis of storytelling. And that really sat with me. It was actually just a passing comment, but it was the one comment I took away from her speech. And why it resonated with me is because for the last 6 years or so since we started Lawyers for Nature, what we've been trying to do is just simply tell a different story. And everything we do with the Rights of Nature movement and why we do what we do is about telling a story that enables policymakers, people in business to do things differently. And the reality is, unless we do things differently, we all know where it's headed, right? So what does doing things differently actually mean? Well, we have aligned our work with the politics, the ethics, and the moral underpinning that is Rights of Nature. And Rights of Nature is about telling a story where nature is a subject of the law rather than an object of the law. At the moment, the story we tell ourselves is that nature is our property. Nature is separate to us as human beings. We are exceptional as a species. We are not just one of many, but we are exceptional. And that we sit at the top of a pyramid or triangle, if you like, as the kind of apex predator or the apex species, as opposed to sitting in a network of relational responsibilities and relationships. So the story we tell ourselves at the moment is the way we behave with nature is that we create a set of laws, usually called environmental laws, sometimes called planning laws, that regulate our relationship with that object. And the Rights of Nature approach is to attempt to reframe that story where nature is a subject of our laws. Now, I can be here all day talking about a critique of that because, of course, it still places us quite near the center of the universe of that situation. But ultimately, we're regulating ourselves in many, many ways. And you're right, people who critique the rights of nature, they say, well, it's not for us to give rights to nature. But frankly, whatever we're doing right now isn't working either. So we've got to come up with something better. We've got to iterate. We've got to create a social, moral, and ethical and philosophical underpinning that works for the future and works for all species, all habitats, and all ecosystems. And so Rights of Nature for us starts at the beginning of the work. It is what you plug into the machine to make the machine work better, go better for everybody. And it is saying this in essence. We have created a legal system and nature is a part of that legal system, and nature should be protected in a way, in the same way, on the same levels that human beings are protected by each other, by organizations, by states. The rights that we give nature in that respect might be different to humans, but ultimately the justice system should jump into action if those rights are breached. And so in 2022, we decided to experiment with a 18 million pound corporation, fairly small, very, very good-willed in many ways, that said, what if nature was on our board of directors? So we said, yeah, okay, let's try it. And that has been extraordinarily successful in bringing nature as a conversation, as a rights holder, as a stakeholder into what is now a £21 million business. And those people understand that they have to consult with nature. They can't just ride roughshod over the rights of nature. And so now our work is centered much more around bigger organizations, state infrastructure, public good companies, where we are starting to roll that model out into those spaces to give nature a space, to give nature a part of the conversation. And so that's what we do. And yeah, really happy to answer any questions on that.
Thank you, Brontie. We will go around, answer that question, then I have specific questions for all the panelists as well. So Mumta, I'm going to pop that question back over to you. What does the rights of nature mean to you, both in practical and ethical terms? Why is it important? And what is your own work within the rights of nature movement? Oh, Mumta, you're on mute. There you go.
Thank you, Ashley, and a big hello to everybody here. I can talk about what the rights of nature means to me, but I would like to invite everybody to attune and find out what the rights of nature means to you. Because if you attune deeply enough, you'll get it like that. So I'll invite you all to take a deep breath in, just close your eyes for a moment, and bring your attention to your heart. And feel your heart connecting with the heart of the entire cosmos. And then feel your heart connecting with the heart of the earth. And feel your heart connecting with the hearts of all beings everywhere. So there are universal laws that govern all life. And when we align with them, we create a cycle of peace, harmony, and prosperity for all of life. When we're not aligned, we create a spiral of destruction, as we can see in the world today. And all societies that have ignored this truth have perished. At the moment, we have violated 6 out of 9 planetary boundaries. This is scientific. Climate change is only one of them. The structures of law that separate us from the web of life that we are an intrinsic part of are at the very root and core of this destructive cycle. With the rights of nature, we are reversing that cycle to create the legal foundations of a regenerative society where all life can thrive. The rights of nature has many layers and levels to it, but at its absolute core and essence is the healing of our separation from the rest of nature, which then extrapolated out translates into better relationships with all of life. So better human relationships, better relationships with all of the beings that we are in relationship with in this planet. Law governs relationship, but at the moment, it only governs relationships between what we call subjects of the law, other human beings, and arbitrary objects like ships, when it became economically desirable to give legal entityship to certain non-living things. Yet it doesn't govern the most fundamental relationship that we have, and that's our relationship with the source of life, our relationship with the natural world. And in terms of the work that we're doing, this is why I created the integrated rights framework. We have human rights, we have corporate rights, but the foundation of those rights is missing from our legal system. We cannot have a right to life if that which gives us life doesn't have a corresponding right to life. We cannot have an economy without nature, because all the goods and the services that make up the economy either are created by people or they're created by nature. Even if you look at AI, AI is dependent on either people and ultimately also dependent on nature. There is nothing that exists without nature in this entire cosmos. And so the structures of law that have accelerated this destructive trajectory that we're on have forgotten that fundamental truth. So all we're doing is really putting these foundations back in place to ensure that all life can thrive. In terms of what we're doing about it, initially, I formed Nature's Rights to bring a European citizens' initiative to put the rights of nature on the European legislative agenda. We took our draft directive to the European Parliament in 2017. After that, we worked with the European Economic and Social Committee. Their brief to us is, can the rights of nature encompass all of the other rights? And it was to that end that we did a study with 2 major Italian universities looking at the feasibility of a fundamental EU charter for the rights of nature. And it was out of this that the integrated rights framework came about. Later on, Ashley, we will speak when we have a little bit more time going into exactly what this framework is. Since then, I've worked with many academic institutions and organizations, grassroots movements around the world, conducted educational programs. But more recently, we've been working with a political party here in the UK, not because this is a political initiative, but because this was a political party that were inspired by the work that we were doing and offered to table a bill if we were to create one. So I've created a UK bill, which is based on the integrated rights framework and on translating that framework into law into the UK, which will be a world first, because even though we have some countries that have put a provision in the constitution recognizing the rights of nature, this goes a lot further and actually is a proper framework that integrates the other rights within the rights of nature, brings in a duty of care, takes a bioregional approach, various other things. So that will be launching soon. Apart from that, yes, one more thing to say, that the framework is, it's a legal framework, it's a policy framework, and it's also a corporate governance framework. So it operates on multiple levels. It is highly flexible in that other frameworks can be layered onto it. It is hugely adaptable. So, for example, somebody came to me about the rights of AI, and immediately I whipped out the framework, and we could see where the rights of AI would fall within this hierarchy of rights, and how the rights of AI could be used to develop AI in a way that would enhance human rights and the rights of nature. And so without this kind of ethical framework, legal, ethical, policy, and governance framework in place, the rights of AI would just be another thing in the mix. So anyway, just to throw that out there, because none of you have seen the framework, it probably doesn't make a lot of sense. But yeah, to answer the question very simply, it's about healing that core separation.
Thank you, Mumta. Rosa, I'm going to pop the same question over to you. What does rights of nature mean to you, both in practical and moral terms? Why is it important for us to be discussing? And what is your work within the rights of nature movement?
I'm fascinated to hear everyone's answers so far and to see so many people connected. So this is very exciting to me. And I have a little bit of a cold, so bear with me. So I am a Peruvian scientist, and I have both Amazonian and Andean indigenous roots. So I have had quite a unique upbringing of being between both worlds. The one in which I was formed professionally, which is in science, in a PhD in chemical biology in the United States, and a foot in the ancestral world of my own ancestors, my grandmother, who is a healer, and all of our heritage from different regions and remote areas of Peru, which is where I'm calling from today. I'm calling from Peru. So to me, when I started to learn about the term rights of nature, I see it as just a modern way to define something which has already been practiced and embedded within cultures for generations. So when we think about what rights of nature is aiming to do from all of its beauty angles, ultimately boils down to see it as equal as alive. And when we look at cosmovisions, worldviews from both Amazonian people, Andean people, but even beyond the global south region, when we look at areas all the way from Alaska to different parts of the world, for indigenous people, nature is alive. It is an inherent thing of an inherent perspective, and that dictates how we approach nature. Whether it's I am going to be taking this flower for consumption, but I'm going to ask for permission from it and make sure that there is enough so I can regenerate afterwards. So those coming after me will have enough of it. So there is a reciprocity that is just I don't think it's something that is overthought too much, but rather just inherently applied. And so as I started to learn more about rights of nature as a tool, so powerful already with many examples worldwide, to just give really fairness in the game, the fact that corporations already have personhood in courts, I think it's a clear example that there are many benefits to give the same personhood to nature in court. And there can be many debates as to the details of that, but ultimately it's just making the field game, the play field, a bit more fair. But I think also from my scientific perspective, something that I started to learn throughout my professional years still forming, it's that I saw so much disconnection between the scientific data that we put out there and the cultural information from our communities and what gets translated into policy. And unfortunately, although there are more spaces, although not enough, to get indigenous leaders and local leaders to speak up worldwide, that doesn't mean that these thoughts and perspectives are incorporated into scientific publications and scientific data that ultimately generates the basis for policy. And so I see rights of nature as a way to be able to unite these worlds in a way that provides an actual chance for us to document this knowledge and guide ourselves in our decision making for businesses and for the planet and for countries, in a way that thinks about regeneration of our planet wholly, both from a biodiversity perspective but at a cultural, because these two terms are so inherently intertwined that I think the fact that we have separated them, it's one of the issues as to why our planet is suffering, because we know most of the biodiverse areas in our planet are protected by a smaller amount of people. So within our our small corner in the world, I lead an organization that is based in Peru, called Amazon Research Internacional. And the reason why I even started it was because when I was finishing my studies, I wanted to find a place where I could contribute with scientific information, but that in a way that is welcoming of indigenous leaders to participate, train in science, participate as co-authors, so that that cultural perspective can be fully, properly integrated. And then that scientific information can be brought forward to decision makers and to lawmakers to make a change. And to give you an example of that, we have an extensive project on stingless bees, which is the native bees of our tropics. They don't sting. Absolutely fascinating. If you don't know about them, I suggest that you look them up. We did a campaign with National Geographic to be able to shine light in this life form that very few have heard of. And we started to conduct scientific studies to fill gaps that we saw in the knowledge. And much of these studies were even possible to begin with because they integrated indigenous knowledge from the start, whether that is how to look for these bees in the wild or how to identify them without extensive DNA work that is not sometimes practical. And so by integrating indigenous people and train them, we have had our first example of our one scientific paper where the first author is an Ashaninka indigenous scientist, and his indigenous perspectives and that of his communities are integrated. And we used all of this science information that we have been gathering for the last few years to connect with environmental lawyers, as well as stakeholders in Peru. And after a lot of efforts, our science and cultural information inspire what is now known as Law 32235, which is the first law, a historic law in Peru that for the first time legally recognizes as well as protects and promotes stingless bees as the native species of our country. That is our first step, and it's already creating waves. And our next step from there, it's going to be releasing the first World Rights of Nature Declaration for stingless bees, which we're actively working with our law center, our indigenous partners, and our science partners as well at sometime later this year, with the hope that we can bring a framework that is science-based, but also culturally inclusive, and see, what magic we can create with that, and hopefully inspire that we think about rights of nature inclusively in different life forms, even tiny beings like bees.
Thank you very much, Rosa. We had a couple of questions to ask each of you individually, just for the sake of time, because I had a whole list of really amazing questions. If we can keep the next couple of answers just a little bit shorter, because I had so many amazing questions I want to ask, and this is such an absolutely fascinating field of work. And really, it feels like gaining momentum, but not talked about quite enough. Which brings me, Brontie, to you about what have you seen are the key legal and structural obstacles to implementing rights of nature, especially this in the UK, and what promising shifts are you seeing?
Thanks, Ashley. I'll try and be brief. That's quite a big question. Well, first of all, I think Mumta might have something to say around that with her bill. I think in terms of promising things, I think that if we can get a rights of nature bill, or at least amendments to existing legislation that involve rights of nature, that could be the most promising thing to start on a high note. I think the other really promising things that are happening are the slightly, for want of a better word, smaller things that are going on within policy and law, which is things like the Lewis Council approving the River Ouse having rights and personhood, and accepting that there needs to be bylaws changed in their jurisdiction. And that is replicated along a lot of river communities. So rivers are currently really, really in serious trouble from an ecosystem habitat perspective. And I think people are waking up to the chronic amount of damage that have been done to rivers and how rights of nature might support river restoration. So I think those are the really promising things that we're seeing. I think obviously within my own work, within Lawyers for Nature, is the idea of business that's fit for the future for all species and all ecosystems on Earth. I think that's a really interesting concept. So the idea of regenerative business, the idea of circular, really truly circular business, not just saying you're circular, but really genuinely engaging with what regenerative business looks like. Those are all really, really good things. I think just the stumbling blocks that exist is really what I said in my introduction, is it's getting people with power to understand how we tell a different story. It's really, really hard when you are completely ingrained in powerful systems to take a step back from that and understand what it might look like to have reciprocity, to have relational responsibility with parts of nature, to have made space for a discussion around what might be fair in terms of future generations and the equity stake that they should be given. So those are really challenging conversations, and it takes a long, long time to reset the moral sort of dial, if you like, in favour of nature and other species. Does that help?
Yes. And I'm desperate to ask, and it's probably not the right forum to do so. What businesses have we found out there that truly are doing this in the right way? But we'll save that for another conversation. Um, Mumta, exactly a great segue to you about you've developed an integrated rights network for nature. My understanding is that it unites law, science, and ancestral wisdom. How does this specific approach help us build a society where all the bits and pieces of a system can thrive together? And how do you see that's different from a more traditional approach? On mute again, Mumta. Oh, Mumta, you're on mute. Oh,
Okay, so
great.
I'm going to ask if we can show a couple of visuals. The first being the regenerative iceberg, degenerative and no, the other one. Cool. Okay, so coming firstly to your first question of, the how, the what and the why, and how is it different to everything else out there? If we're to think of our current society as an iceberg, and I would look at the iceberg on the left, which I call the degenerative iceberg. If you think of an iceberg and you think of the visible part above the watermark, that's all of the polycrises, all of the crises that we can see, the ecological crisis, the sixth mass extinction, the inequality and poverty, climate crisis, food crisis, economic crisis, and so on. But if you were to look underneath, what we don't see are all of the systems and the structures that generate all of these undesirable results on autopilot. So underneath that, if you look under the water, you see silo systems and structures, fragmentation, which comes from a mechanistic paradigm where the earth is seen to be a machine or something separate to us, comes from the separation consciousness, which is encoded and entrenched in law. And that's really at the root of what drives the whole thing. Now, all of our societal solutions act at the lowest point of leverage, which is at the top of the iceberg. So we're trying to tackle climate change, we're trying to tackle biodiversity, we're trying to approach all these things in silos. But of course, as soon as we resolve one problem, another problem appears because all of the roots, the machinery that's driving all of these crises from below is still left intact. Now, environmental law in its current regulatory form acts at the top of the iceberg, but it's almost impossible to deal with violations of planetary boundaries with this kind of siloed, fragmented regulatory approach. We need something a lot deeper. So with the framework that we've created, we're acting right at the bottom of the iceberg, the highest point of leverage, where a small shift can bring about massive change for the entire society. Think the abolition of slavery, or, when slaves got rights, or women got rights. These are sort of big shifts that have huge ramifications for the whole. So if you look at the green iceberg, by recognizing human rights and economic rights within the rights of nature as the foundation, then leads to holistic, a holistic paradigm, whole system structures where you're not operating in silos, and that then gives regenerative results on autopilot in a multiple different ways. So you get thriving biodiversity, thriving ecosystems, redistribution of wealth and power, pandemic resilience, health and well-being, climate resilience, and so on. And to come more to the nitty-gritty of the how, let's move on to the next slide, and I'll show you exactly what our framework is proposing. Okay, so if we look at our current sustainability model on the left, you've got people, you've got economy, and you've got nature. As you can see, all three of them are separate to each other. If we look at the legal framework that deals with this, people have rights, human rights. The economy has rights, corporate and property rights, but nature has no rights. Now, if you were to just bring the rights of nature and drop it into that system, it's in adversarial relationship to the other rights. And this is one of the keys. So it means that the only remedy is to battle it out in court. And of course, the economic rights are more powerful. They're more powerful in law because they're enforceable against private actors and public actors. And they're also more powerful in terms of the way the justice system currently operates, because they have deep pockets and they can pay lawyers to bring these huge, big lawsuits. So if the rights of nature came in, yes, it gives a little bit more accountability, but it's not a complete answer. We are not in adversarial relationship with nature, because nature is the foundation of life. So with the nature's rights model, we look at it differently. We look at the earth as the foundation, people as a subsystem of nature, and the economy as a subsystem of people. And when you do it that way, you get a nested hierarchy of rights, which are synergistic. It's a collaborative rights framework. So a subsystem, so you have nature's rights as the umbrella. A subsystem of nature's rights would be human rights. Other species would also have rights. And a subsystem of human rights would be your economic rights, and that would be the right relationship. So what we've done is we've mapped that out on the framework, and then we put some metrics on it. So if you were to take the UN Sustainable Development Goals and you map it onto your 3 circles, it fits nicely: nature, people, economy. And then you take a 4th circle at the bottom, which are the planetary boundaries. And what we get is a framework where the economy has to serve people in a way that serves the wider web of life. And that way we're building coherence and integrity in the whole. So as you can see, this is programming something completely different into our societal DNA than what we have at the moment, which is the current sustainability model. So I hope that's clear and succinct. There's a lot more information. There's a walkthrough video, a guide, and all that on our website, which is www.natures-rights.org.
Thank you,
Thank
Mumta,
you.
for the
And
framework.
on to the next.
Yeah, thank you. So I heard a little bit about the legal background framework. And then Rosa, I wanted to ask you, you already mentioned the stingless bees, but is there something along the line of your work with the bees, your work in the Amazon, that you feel like has really provided you more of a feeling that nature's rights really do need to be recognized as such and not just as a resource for human consumption?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, because we have had those active conversations over the last few years. So, for example, the Marañón River in Peru, was just granted legal rights, and the activist, the Cucama leader, Mariluz, that led this, received the Goldman Prize for the environment. So absolutely fantastic work. On one side, I think that led to conversations about whether the locals would be able to still use the river for transport or local fishing, traditional fishing, and any other ways in which they interact with the river. And of course, questions around what does this mean moving forward. So as we have been working not just on the science information, but also on the capacity building and cultural work for stingless bees, we have been openly just discussing this with not just community leaders, but different community members, women, men, and youth as well. We have a lot of youth that have been involved in this. And there is one aspect that I think is really important to highlight, which not always, I have noticed that it's not always given a space for, is the local economy. We need to have sustainable economy for conservation work to proceed. It is impossible to separate those, especially because these areas tend to have less opportunities. And so when we talk about installing new ways to protect, let's say, stingless bees, if we do it for the sake of protecting the bees, which we are all for, if there's no economic remuneration that allows the people to continuously actively work to boost the species, to protect the trees in which they are nesting, then it becomes really difficult for these to work long term. We have seen many projects that have failed because of that. And so part of our Rights of Nature Declaration has a economic perspective, which is how to guide fair trade, because so that the communities have the confidence that the Rights of Nature Declaration won't deprive them from these opportunities, which have become a main income source for families, but is also leading to regeneration, but it's also done in a way that they feel protected from the start. We have so many examples, right, of natural resources that are in US pharmacies that came from the Amazon, and there was no remuneration to this date still to the communities. And so we are from the start trying to prevent that and have purposely slow down conversations regarding commercialization until this declaration is fully agreed by everyone and put out there. And so, yeah, that is kind of what we're doing from our little corner.
Rosa, I wanted to follow up on that because so many people today are calling in, probably from London, from around the UK. This is the first year that I've seen as many international people, but I think probably for the most part, we are, calling in from offices or homes, going back to work this afternoon. And since you are the person who is on the ground doing the research, I wanted to ask you how, when we're doing this work, how do we ensure that we are being inclusive and we're giving to the voice of those who may not be in the same boardroom as us, in addition to nature?
We need the people that act as bridges. It's just impossible to do it otherwise. I think I have seen my role in a way develop to be that because I have the ability to speak English and I have been trained in the Western world. So culturally, I understand how to advocate in certain ways for different stakeholders and audiences here. And we need that. And so I say that because we have been working across the Amazon, North, Central, and South in Peru for many years now. And we have, over the years, identified a few key people, which I'm so happy that, we have many indigenous leaders. Like an example, a guy named Richard, that is a Shaninka park ranger that now has become a scientist, training with us for a few years. A few other people in different regions, Kukama, as well as Shipibo, that each community tends to have their own representative that will learn Spanish to be acting as those bridges between the community as well as their municipalities or even just at national levels. We have found the same to emerge in these science conversations so that they can make it even more inclusive for other community members that perhaps don't even speak Spanish, which is kind of like the common thread for us, for them to also be able to contribute, whether it is with a scientific perspective, data collection, or even just cultural perspective, so that their voices are actually inclusive. And so that it has become such a strong aspect of what we do, because we see that as the more sustainable way in which to carry this work, because now many of these kind of key people are training formally to be a scientist, are participating actively in leadership, and are inspiring the next generation, of course, to do so too. And I am really excited to see almost this wave of indigenous-led science that is emerging, that it's so culturally conscious and so aware that science in journals that are walled and that don't translate to policy, it's not fair for countries like ours, where we need it to elevate, in this case, things like rights of nature.
Thank you so much. Which brings me to a next interesting question. Brontie, if nature had all the rights we wanted it to have, and it was standing in court, who would be held accountable for the violations, and how do you feel justice would be served?
So I think it's just worth taking a step back from that and going upstream for a second. Rights don't always have to be confrontational. So we as human beings generally understand that we have a whole bag of rights, but probably none of us here today, and I'm just speaking not on behalf of the audience, but us in the panel, know anybody that's ever had to go to court to defend those rights. I mean, Rosa might be slightly different, but certainly in the UK, we have a stable situation for humans. So we've created a space where, and it's taken quite a long time, where both corporations and state level bodies tend to just act in a way that the rights already, the rights exist and they don't need to be litigated. I think in an ideal situation, we'd need to get there as quickly as possible on behalf of nature. So we don't really want to see a situation where we are constantly in battles and litigation dealing with conflicts because we've awarded rights to nature. I think, in fact, in some ways, that would be one of the most disastrous things that can happen to the rights of nature movement. However, we do need a set of tests for when we come up against conflicts. And I suppose the good news is that we do already have a huge body of knowledge on conflicts. We see conflicts all the time. We see conflicts in business life between employees and employer. We see conflicts between parents and children. We see conflicts between public bodies and community groups. And we resolve them really, really well, and often without, going to court and having to have a judge make a final ruling on that. So what we really need to do to achieve a level of harmony, and I say harmony as opposed to justice, because I think when we're rethinking justice, we need better language. The ethic of justice is a very, it's sort of a very adversarial concept. I get justice, you don't. The rights of nature movement isn't really about that. The rights of nature movement is about learning to live better, learning to do business better, learning to treat each other and our ecosystem and our habitats and the more than human habitats that surround us, to work with them rather than against them, to work with reciprocity, to work with a level of restraint sometimes. So, I think we should all be engaging with the degrowth conversation. I think nuanced degrowth is really important. And I think we will have to start thinking about degrowth. We cannot have infinite growth on a finite planet. So, sorry to hijack your question and say, my view on it, but ultimately I would see it as a failure of the rights of nature movement if we constantly ended up in court. However, just to answer your question, if that does happen, then really and truly, where we've awarded what we would call substantive non-negotiable rights to humans, such as, the right to life, for example, we may even end up in this country with something like the right to a healthy environment. We don't have it we don't have it as such at the moment, although the UK has signed the declaration to say that we should have the right to a healthy environment. But the reality is you can't have a right to a healthy environment for a human being if you don't have a healthy environment in the first place. So any conflict, if it were to go to court, has to recognise that you have this meta situation, you have this kind of overreaching situation that you have to give a level of priority to in order to then enforce the rights that come after that. And to get super specific, and I know time is short, so I'll be super quick on this point, some of the tests that we use already would work really, really well. So we have things like the best interest test. We have things like applying the least amount of harm to the most amount of people, most amount of species, most amount of ecosystems test. We have things like Rawlinson's theory of, justice. John Rawls is an amazing theorist in terms of justice. We have things like feminist ethic of care. We have conversations around relational responsibility and nodal interactions and resolving conflict through looking at relational responsibility. And very finally, of course, who is going to be responsible? Well, ultimately, it's likely to be those with the deepest pockets. That's generally the way law works. Sometimes that's the state, sometimes that's a corporation that has done significant harm, but law generally works to find the harm, trace the harm back through principles of causation, and then award damages. And it might be that we need to resolve some of that as well. So that was kind of a very whistle-stop tour of justice and law for you.
That in itself probably could hold a very long conversation. Just go on, but thank you for reframing that, Brontie. In the interest of time, because we only have 10 minutes left, and obviously this is a very large topic to even just begin the discussion on, I wanted to ask all of you, and Mumta, I'm going to start with you and then follow up with Brontie and Rosa. But what is giving you hope that the systems that we can shift these systems fast enough in the face of accelerating climate change? And within that context, what role can each person do in catalyzing this change? Mumta, I wanted to ask you specifically because you're working a bit more in the policy space. How are you finding that's an easy way to mobilize communities to stand behind the rights of nature? And what's giving you hope in that process?
Well, I found that in the past decade that I've been engaging with policymakers around the rights of nature, the thing that lands the easiest and that policymakers get is the integration of the rights. The integrated rights framework is the easiest way that I've been able to communicate this to people at a high level and for them to instantly get it, that, oh my God, it's like a light bulb goes on. The thing that gives me hope is, ironically, the fact that we are 6 out of 9 planetary boundaries, because we don't need to convince people that there is a problem and that what is there is clearly not working. And to me, it's simply a matter of people getting it. You know, once people get it, I believe in the human spirit. I believe that ultimately we are not a suicidal population. Ultimately, we want to thrive. Ultimately, we want our future generations to thrive. Ultimately, we want to live in harmony with nature and the rest of life. We want prosperity for all of life. And that's what gives me hope. I believe that human beings, once they get it, will act, and it won't be that hard. It'll actually happen all by itself, and it is happening. It's not a dream. It's happening.
Thank you, Mumta. I love that thought that it is a nice grounding reminder that we do all want to live in harmony with nature. Thank you, Mumta. Brontie, same question to you. What's giving you hope, and how do we mobilize individuals in society? What's giving you hope right now?
So I think this is kind of a bit of a strange answer, but I think what's giving me some level of hope is that we are starting to have conversations around grief and loss, whereas I think we were largely ignoring that before. I think we are starting to understand, and this speaks to your point about will we do it in time? The short answer is no, we absolutely will not do it in time. We will lose a significant amount of life on Earth before we do enough, and we may never do enough. But I quite like an organisation called All We Can Save, because they acknowledge the grief, they acknowledge the loss, and they acknowledge the fact that we're not going to save everything. And they talk about moving forward, knowing that we will save something, we will act. And so I think there are changes afoot. There are both policy and philosophical changes afoot. And I think there are a lot of well-meaning people out there working in organisations that don't really allow those stories to come through. And I feel like as those well-meaning people grow, that groundswell grows and those people come together, they will sort of steamroller over the bureaucracy of those organisations and allow those new stories to be told and come through. So I think two things: engaging with grief and loss is really, really important. We're not going to save everything. That's the short answer. And we're certainly not going to do it at any level of speed. And I think allowing new stories to come through and prioritising storytellers in your organisations, giving storytellers space to tell new stories is super important. Thanks.
Had a bit of a roller coaster of emotions reaction to that, Brontie. I felt very excited about the fact that we're finally addressing grief and addressing the reality of the situation. And then it felt quite heavy in my stomach when that you really process what that means for the future. But thank you for that. And Rosa, last to you. What's giving you hope? How do we mobilize? What do we do next?
So I live in England, but I'm often in Peru with all of our work. My family is here. So I get to literally go from the deep corners of the Amazon to the busy cities worldwide. And I think I keep seeing so much eagerness, especially in youth, to do something that actually works. Um, Regardless, of background, of language, and of culture. And I think seeing that almost relentless hope within the communities that I work with across the Amazon, despite of facing the greatest challenges and impacts of climate change that really are hard to even imagine for the rest of the world, they are still standing up and smiling and feeling so honored and proud to be able to protect these lands and these rivers. And then seeing people in England, different groups working really hard to bring light to species that are lesser known and mobilize change around the world, because we need those partnerships. We need these international relationships to actually move the needle. It's impossible to think that one isolated group will do it, because resources are different and opportunities are so too. And so, yeah, I think seeing so many groups be so active, regardless of where they are, it gives me so much hope that it is within our generation that we can do something so meaningful that we will actually, start to regenerate our planet in a way that my children and their children can still enjoy our jungles, our forests, and our oceans.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the three of you for what has been an absolutely fantastic conversation and has given me lots of little notes in my notebook here about further conversations we can all have. I want to thank everybody who has signed on today. I know people probably have 3 o'clock calls that they're getting to, or 3 o'clock new sessions. What's giving me hope at the moment is that London Climate Action Week has more than doubled their events this year, which is really showing a movement of people who are working towards the right answer, and that is absolutely incredible. For those of you who are attending events this week, TreeSisters is offering up a free meditation, moment of reflection, however you'd like to call it or approach it. It is on the London Climate Action Week events page. You can sign up for it and we'll send it to you via email mid next week. But it is a guided reflection on, it's a recording, so you can listen to it at any time, but on how to manage grief or pain or any of the emotions you might be feeling this week as you are entering into the conversations about the climate, about nature, about the environment that might feel quite heavy and difficult. So we'd like to invite you to please sign up for that. We'd also like you to visit each one of these extraordinary women's websites. Please view their work, please support them. If you would like to, TreeSisters is also a UK-based charity working with women in the subtropics and Indigenous communities replanting forests, and we'd like you to support us as well if you feel the urge to do so. We'll leave this up. We want to thank you again so much for joining us today. It is the start of a really beautiful conversation about the rights of nature. If you have any questions, if you want to follow up with any of these amazing women, please email us at TreeSisters. You can get in contact with me. I'm Ashley at treesisters.org, and I'm happy to pass those questions on. Thank you again.